Welcome to Kodachi for Three, a bi-weekly podcast where three friends and passionate players discuss the world of Wraith. If you're looking for flesh and blood content, we've got it. Focusing on competitive play, community building, and yes, going off on plenty of tangents. From our favorite casual builds to the market, nothing is off limits. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for Kodachi for Three.
Welcome. We are your hosts for Kodachi for Three. I'm Adam Roach.
I'm Drayton Gans.
And I'm freezing. But, that's just because my office isn't well insulated and it's like 6 degrees. It's great, guys. Hi, I'm Shay.
I have a space heater over here, and thus I'm warmer. It's keeping all my flesh and blood cards that are open behind me. Nice and cozy. All right. Well, featured card this week. We do actually have one, and it is a brand new one. I'm throwing you a bone, Shay. I wanted you to be excited, so this time our featured card is Spring Tidings. And guess whose specialization it is?
I mean, it's a certain bouncing boy, isn't it?
Okay.
What?
It's going to be weird now that people can see our faces, because you actually... We'll go with you made me break character there, but I just crack it up. Anyway, so Spring Tidings is a Benji specialization. When Spring Tidings hits, you'll draw a card for each other attack action card with 2 or less base power you control in the combat chain. It does have Go Again itself, it's free, and it blocks for 3. Pitches yellow. What do you think?
And most importantly, it does 2 damage. Base. That means our boy Benji says this is going to touch you. Unless you use, equipment.
I mean, I'm fairly certain that they would never give Benji a specialization that didn't trigger his ability.
Yeah, so one thing is that they did print this in a set with cards that say instants prevent damage in Guardian, so it's not a guarantee hit. But it's definitely good. It's solid. Mm-hmm. I think this gives Benji a reliable win condition type thing where if I can whittle you down enough, then I can just string a slew of 1s and 2s together, draw a few more, and close the game, right? With literal unblockable damage.
Yeah, it actually comes in a very interesting place. So Ancestral Guidance in Benji is also interesting because it doesn't pump it up to 3 until kind of a relevant window has passed. They can still jump in with a D-React at that point, but you're still getting a card. And with, we'll probably touch on those later as we talk about things, but 100 wins and a bunch of the other ninja kind of rares and commons in this set all also kind of basically what you're wanting to do with Benji is you're wanting to just do go again and supplement it with card draw. This lets you potentially draw another smattering of cards. Plunder Run you can still combo it with in Blitz. You can't? Did Plunder Run get hit in Blitz too?
No, I don't think it did. I think it was just Ball Lightning, but I could be wrong. I'm not 100% certain.
I was pretty sure Plunder Run still got to be alive in Blitz.
Oh man, I'm gonna need to check that because I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just not certain. So
I'm pretty sure it was Plunder Run or not Plunder. Ball Lightning and Duskblade that got banned in Blitz, and then it was Plunder Run and Ball Lightning that got banned in CC in the last update. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
Yeah.
It's one of those that I haven't been keeping up with the bans in Blitz, unfortunately.
If I'm mistaken, I'm going to have to change a whole meme name.
A whole meme name.
Well, because, it is going to become a little more relevant because the Battle Hardens at these callings and bigger events are supposed to be Blitz, apparently. Which I think actually is, as much as I'm not a huge fan of Blitz, I think is actually a smart call because having played in some of those events where it's okay, we're going to squeeze this big event in with tons of people into a few hours. Not really great with draft and or CC, but with a smaller format like Blitz where it's nice, fast, we can just get going, hit the ball rolling, go. I think you could actually get enough rounds where it can make it relevant and feel okay. Yeah,
but no, this set, Everfest in general is just so many tools for Benji, and it's so nice because we've got 2 separate lines now that have playable cards that are 0 cost, which is native Go Again, that also get little kicker effects that can make some of the conditional Go Agains that you might have wanted to play from crew work. Ride the Tailwind I think is actually a pretty neat card, and then the 100 Wins combo is actually super interesting for the Death by a Thousand Cuts Benji, where you are using all these small go again cards and using things like Plunder Run and Spring Tidings and all this to just like play a bunch of cards. Well, then you can Winds of Eternity, get those 100 wins back in and give you some late game staying power if you're burning through your entire deck.
This card. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I have seen kind of that recurring theme throughout the new set is that there is a lot more ways to keep cards in your deck. There's a lot more ways to make a long game version of a Blitz deck that really extend the efficiency of your 40 cards.
Well, not just Blitz. I mean, I think that they're wanting to give... Well, they've given a lot of good tools to Fatigue recently. And also, like, the banning of Plunder Run does hurt aggro's game plan. I think they're giving some tools to aggro decks that help with this whole like, hey, in case you're worried about running out or running out of gas, as long as you're playing your game plan efficiently, you should be able to kind of get there, right? And so like I'm not saying that like it's a new meta where we're just gonna see aggro again, but I think that we're gonna see a nice spread of things come ProQuest season, and I'm kind of excited for that. I think that we're going to see some spiky, cool, random decks just win out of nowhere just because people aren't prepared for them, and I think that's going to be kind of cool.
Yeah,
I'm actually
I tend to agree.
super... I was going to say, I'm super interested to see what 100 Wins is going to do to kind of affect certain more control-y Katsu builds in CC.
I think it's less interesting than that. I think the other one, Break Tides...
Oh, yeah. No,
I think
that
that's
one
way
is
more interesting. I think the other thing, the Wax On card, is very interesting for Control Katsu, because if you reverse those decks that say, hey, I'm going to do a 0 cost go again, just slam into your face type deck, well, now you got a card that says I block for 5 on red and I block for 4 on yellow. So, I mean, that could be a very spicy defense reaction that could be really efficient for them.
But yeah, but getting back to Spring Tidings, it's just pure gas for Benji, and honestly, all the young heroes from Crew that got their specializations in this set got some very spicy cards.
Yeah, all of them in general I think are good. I would still make the case that there's really nothing you can do to address Datadol's 3 intelligence. I just don't think that's going to work out. I don't think that's ever going to be a viable thing.
But but her specialization makes Datadol interesting. And before, it was just bad.
I mean,
so
it's always interesting.
The thing about specialization is that it's most interesting, not a Datadol, but Shiana.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true there. I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, the main thing I'm liking out of Everfest, and this kind of ties into these, is they are really hitting a lot of the themes that I've always wanted to work out of Heroes, but that haven't been the top tier, right? So Boost Dash got a ton of support. Boost Dash doesn't exist in Classic Constructed. It's only a thing in Blitz. Now it might be a thing both places. Prism, Aggro Herald type builds, it wasn't really efficient because there was no reason for big decks like Bravo, big decks like Rhinar, not to just pop every single one of your attacks and care about it at all. Now it's going to be a lot more relevant, it's going to be harder to do, and if they do, they're likely to see some auras come out there to punish them for making those breaks. So I just kind of like seeing that.
No, I definitely think that and this is what I was talking about locally with wanting to be prepared for Everfest by playing lots of different things. It's like when you see these different play lines in the decks, and whenever you see these new cards, like, oh, hey, that helps this archetype, or this helps me go this direction. That wasn't really relevant beforehand. Best way you get to do that is just by playing lots of things. So what do we think? Getting back to kind of Benji for a minute, how do we feel like seeing these specializations for these young heroes? If that's gonna like indicate anything for adult versions of them?
Man, I would really like it too, especially with the continued release of all these young heroes, with their continued support of the Blitz format and kind of making it more and more competitive. I'd like to think that we would see adult versions of these heroes eventually, especially now that we are seeing specializations. It does feel like they're investing a lot in a hero that they never intend to be able to play in all forms of the game, right? So it does lead me to believe they probably will eventually, but it's still early.
I think it's a maybe, but it's not going to be anytime soon. I think as we move forward with the story and the lore, and we have living legends happen and things like that, like that's when we're going to start seeing these heroes pop up more. I don't think we're really going to see it in the immediate future, and I also don't think. I kind of honestly hope that if we see an adult, like let's say we see an adult Kasai, I want her to be different than Kasai is now, and I want her to have another young version to go with it. That's
Okay.
me personally. Like, I think that would be more interesting. I think that'd be more fun. Give me choices. And that way also we can recheck the design space of like, is this fitting in CC, or does this not work in CC very well? Now that's not to say like it needs to be drastically different. Like, I think Ira, even like we all have like our mixed feelings about Ira existing in the world, but I would love to see Ira eventually become a full-fledged adult ninja card that we can play. But do I want her to have the same just stagnant +1 on second attack? No, but something where like, hey, I'm buffing secondary attacks along those lines, where it's like, okay, if I've done something, then now this new thing happens. I would be cool with that, right? But it's just like let's make it interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's precedent with Bravo star of the show now, so.
Yeah. I kind of think that necessarily they won't. Just because there's a young version, they have specializations, they'll get an adult version. I think Blitz as like a design space is somewhere where they want to be more experimental and try different things. And I think, recent heroes of a certain class that are of Power Ranger colorization maybe have shown that, we maybe be a little more restrained when we're in Classic Constructed. But, let's let Blitz be like crazy, like weird diverse land where, you can get a little weird and spicy with your decks. Like that really differentiates the formats a bit more.
I honestly can see that from the perspective of just keeping the formats feeling different, keeping the formats feeling fresh, and not just seeing the same heroes, the same metas across both boards. So from that perspective, I do kind of like the fact that they wouldn't be the same, and keeping Classic Constructive a little tighter. So I think I'm okay with that. I don't know. What do you guys think? Move on to a main topic here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and hit it up.
I realized
All right.
I missed an opportunity for an Ice Wizard joke at the start of this, and, it's really tearing me apart inside.
You did. You just said you wanted to stay warm. You didn't really. If Islander was our card, I think you probably would have hit it.
Shay, is it tearing you asunder?
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh.
the card. I don't know. Crippling crushed. Brute word.
Brute word. Dominated.
Smashed by a big tree.
That's wrong class. Anyway, moving
Okay.
on.
Yeah. You rolled a 1 on your 6. We've got to go. Okay, so main topic today, we're actually going to discuss building advantage in Flesh and Blood. And so we'll talk a little bit about what this means, but we're going to talk about 3 different types of advantage. This isn't really going to be a discussion on how to build your deck for advantage, but more like how do you build advantage throughout a game? How do you make decisions in the mid game, during the game that set you up for success, and kind of that philosophy on building an advantage throughout a game. We're going to cover that in 3 subcategories today. It's going to be like your hand advantage, your deck advantage, and like working on pitch stacking. We're going to go through those individually, but we're going to kind of start out with hand advantage. Now, this is pretty straightforward, but what do you guys want to throw a definition out there? I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah, so like cards in your hand are the biggest resource in Flesh and Blood. Like, it doesn't matter how much you can pitch for, it doesn't matter how much you could pump an attack if you don't have the cards in your hand to do that thing. Right? Like, that's the thing that we often forget when we're thinking about these crazy wonky combos when we're first seeing cards coming out, is that you only have 4 cards, presumably, most of the time, in your hand, and you gotta make the best turn with those 4 cards. And then if you're blocking, that number comes down a lot, right? Hand advantage was part of why Cheerios Lightning Briar was such a big problem, was because she got to be so efficient with the 4 cards in her hand that basically you didn't get to have a hand, and that was the problem with it. But I mean, they're definitely such a valuable resource, and that's why we see lots of cards that involve card drawing really restricted. So, like for instance, Tome of Findale, pay 1, draw 2 cards. Sounds amazing, right? But it doesn't have Go Again. So unless you can find a way to give it Go Again, or find a way to play it at an instant speed like Kano does, it's really not as effective as you're wanting it to be. So I think it's interesting to think about these things. Also, you have to pitch for cards. That's requiring another card to leave your hand a lot of the time. So it's really interesting to look at that tuning balance of it. And so, that's kind of what we're looking at with his hand advantage. It's just like, using the cards in your hand to your best advantage.
Yep, I completely agree. I had it kind of noted as card draw effects being such a big deal. One other thing I kind of wanted to mention is even I am prone to doing this, but I think it's why people have seen items as so lackluster in the past. The effects on an item aren't really that strong, but when you think about it, it is creating a pseudo hand advantage for you. It is another card on the board that you can access at any given time, effectively increasing your hand. If we're looking at old school potions, giving you additional energy, or if we're looking at all these brand new toys, brand new items that you're getting in the Everfest set, some of that is straight card draw, healing, blocking, whatever it happens to be, just depending on the card. But they are adding little tools and pieces to your hand.
Yeah. Well, and another thing to keep in mind is let's look at even broader, like a mechanologist for a minute, right? Like, so mechanologist plays with items. A lot of them don't say Go Against. They're playing off this card, but it's building a board state advantage that is difficult to remove. Like, we now do have better tools for removing some of that stuff. But almost all of us have been in the situation where Dash has been blasting us for 4 or 5 with every single pistol shot, just because they've built up this board state that is making their hand more efficient, right? It's about that efficiency. And so, you have to figure out how are you using your cards, how does your deck want to use your cards, how does your deck want to use your hand in order to make those things happen. And this is where the arsenal becomes huge in Flesh and Blood. Getting an extra card that you get to play each turn can be such a huge advantage, but it's worth noting, especially to newer players, just because you have a card in hand at the end of your turn does not mean it should automatically go in Arsenal. Probably 9 times out of 10 it should, but I mean, I think every one of us has lost a game because we arsenaled a card that we definitely shouldn't have arsenaled. I lost one just this last month where if I had had that card just to be able to block with it, like that was the only thing I needed, was just I needed 2 more block and I win that game, but I ran out of cards and I lost.
Yep, I mean, yeah. I've forced things into my arsenal just because they didn't defend before, but they were also useless in my arsenal, and so that's been both a blessing and a curse back and forth. You're right, it's very important to think about what you're putting in your arsenal and why, but it's also important to say that while playing 4 cards is very good and utilizing your entire hand will build an advantage, sometimes it would be better to play 2 cards and put something in arsenal, giving yourself a 5-card hand and actually leveraging a larger advantage than just blowing your entire hand every time. And I think that's something else a lot of new players really miss, right? They will sequence to the utmost of playing their hand. They will always play as many cards as possible no matter what.
Yeah, there's sometimes you just accept this turn is going to be middling and I'm going to defend with some stuff. I'm going to do some, poultry action and drop something that'll be relevant, a turn or 2 down the road in my arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, another thing to consider is, let's say you have a lackluster 4-card hand, and your opponent comes in at you with all their cards, but they're only going to really require you to use 3 of those to block. Not swinging back, just putting that last card in arsenal and setting up for that bigger turn now, you're not really netting them too much of an advantage by saying, I'm not going to swing at you, because probably if you're only swinging your weapon at them, they're probably just going to take the damage and just swing with all their cards anyways. So how much are you actually getting out of that weapon swing? If it's a lot, cool, do it. If it's not really much, set up for that bigger turn hand.
Also, I think at the deck building level, before you're even to your play patterns with making the most of those hands and doing, hand advantage based things, look at what you have accessible to you in the form of tools within the class and talent and generic pool that you're playing. And, sometimes there are cards you can look at and be like, wait, this will generate me some econ or hand advantage. Maybe I go with that option, then big yellow numbers.
Yep, that's very important. Like we said,
Um,
card draw effects, hand improvement effects. So even think about things like, so I think it's a bit of an underutilized card, Pursuit of Knowledge. It's an on-hit effect that gives you 1 additional intelligence for the turn, allowing you to draw 5 cards. Think of the common Guardian equipment, the Helm, pay 1, draw 5 cards the next time. I know this does kind of blunt your turn, but that also turns a poor hand of 1 card, any type of resource, into a 5-card hand next turn, or a 2 hand into a 6-card hand next turn if you utilize your arsenal.
I mean,
I do love
Showtime,
me some.
Do
another
what?
card. Showtime and Guardian, another card that yeah, it's pays 3, lets you go search a card. You're not going to be able to play it because it doesn't have go again, but you can throw that card in your arsenal. You're going to draw an extra card at the start of your next turn, so while you're not getting it that turn, there's a little bit of variance there, but still you're kind of getting into a 6-card hand with a big attack in arsenal. So.
Man, I love a cheeky Pursuit of Knowledge, though. Like, if you're just kind of looking for just a whatever blue, just throw one of those in, and it puts a real burden of execution on your opponent on how much they need to block that.
Oh yeah,
It can get
it's a
difficult.
difficult decision. That one's, the damage isn't high, so you want to take it often, but committing 2 cards to block 4 damage or gaining or losing a card advantage of 1 is huge. It's so rough.
I mean, there's a reason why a lot of competitive players consider an IP2 a death sentence, because even 2 turns of just drawing 1 less card is so huge in this game.
Yeah, at a high level of play, an IP2 is just a loss for sure.
But let's really because I know we have some people who are newer that listen to our podcast, so I want to mention just because you might want to play every card in your hand doesn't necessarily mean that's always the right choice. Let's say, going back to the dash example, let's say you have the means to put out an item, and then what's only going to be left is a defense reaction in your hand. Keep the defense reaction in your hand. Don't pitch it just to load a pistol or something like that. That's going to let you survive better into the next turn, even though you have it in hand rather than an arsenal. Just because your arsenal has something in it doesn't mean that you should be discarding every card out of your hand as much as possible. You got to think about what the cards want to do for you, and really think through those types of things.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about pitch stacking and everything, I think, foreshadowing here a little later on, but yeah.
Yeah, we will. It's always important to look at all of your cards, really think about what they're going to do for you, though. I completely agree. It's difficult not to want to play everything and not to think that I built my deck for every card to be good, and thus I always want to play them. But that's just not always the case.
Well, going back to that particular example, right? Let's say your opponent's coming at you. Let's say they're a ninja and they're coming at you with just an extra Kodachi hit, right? You know that's all they're coming in for. If you have a 4-block defense reaction in hand already, there's no reason for you to use that precious defense reaction to block that Kodachi hit when next turn you're just playing the item and then you're going to draw up. Because being able to have that 4 strength defense to block the next turn is probably going to be much more vital than blocking that 1 damage that's coming through to you. So you really got to think about your situations and be a little more aware when you want to get to that level of space of do I keep cards in hand in this situation? That's where you kind of start seeing those level jumps of skill level when you start thinking on those grounds, I think.
Yeah. Or you could be like me, and I brought these cards to hit my opponent, and I'll be damned if I block.
Well, fine. So let's make
Shay,
an example.
I've seen you play defense reactions.
I have too. Shay's a much better player than he tries to admit. But so let's make an aggressive example then. So I think Brute has some really good aggressive cards. Brute also has some good hand advantage and draw cards. So let's talk about Blood Rush Bellow. It's a cheap card. It costs only 1 to play. It'll draw you 2 cards, and that allows you to kind of continue your chain, make stronger attacks because it buffs your attacks by 2. That being said, there are plenty of scenarios in which you would not immediately play a Blood Rush Bellow when it comes into your hand, and would arsenal it and save it for later. It is one of your biggest game plans. It's one of your biggest finishers that's going to push a lot of damage. If you do not have the resources in hand to extend your chain, you still don't want to play that, because if you cannot Mandible Claw for 5 and 5 and then play a strong attack, you have wasted that Blood Rush Bellow. that is the minimum for you to be able to do, right? You're probably going to need to be sitting on 7 resources and a card for a random discard. Two cards for random discards.
And another thing, like going back to that example, so let's say you already have something solid in Arsenal, right? And your opponent, they throw something at you, let's say it's that Pursuit of Knowledge, and you're like, okay, I can't afford for whatever they're playing to draw 5 cards. I'll never recover from that. I will lose this game. So you have this, you have the hand, you have the combo where you could Blood Rush Bellow them, but you know it's not going to win you the game that next turn, and if they get 5 cards, they're probably winning the game and beating you. You're absolutely taking 2 of those cards, blocking it, and then taking one of those cards, swinging at the club, and you're holding on to that Blood Rush Bellow. That is 100% in that situation the right call to make. Seeing that is really difficult sometimes because you want to do the fun, crazy aggro thing. We all want to punch people in the faces in this game, right? We don't want to just sit there and go, I block. It's not the fun part of the game, right? The fun part is when you actually get to start attacking them. Hi, kitty cat.
Another topic that might be worth considering as well is so fatigue decks are a thing. If you're a new player, there comes a point in the game where you've got to be thinking, how can I, utilize this hand in a way that I will have future hands and not just spend out my entire hand for a mediocre defense or a mediocre, attack when they're just looking to get rid of your entire deck. Which, that
is a perfect segue
us
into deck advantage, which is our second type of advantage here. So Shay has already kind of hit the nail on the head there. The second advantage is going to be a deck advantage, and it is going to be maintaining more cards in your deck than your opponent. This can be in a lot of ways. This could just be including more than 60 cards in your deck if you're playing CC, but that is typically not the efficient way or the appropriate way to do this. This is typically done through weapons, breakpoint attacks, and things of that nature, which we'll dive into in a bit more detail. But Shay, since you were already alluding, you wanna kick that one off?
Oh yeah, I mean it's something as someone who likes to play, live fast, die hard style builds, hyper defensive decks. I have to kind of change up my play pattern because, you get to a point where kind of in that late game, you're, Ninja, for example, because that's what I have the most play experience with. There comes a point where you need to be conserving cards in hand and funneling things via pitch back into your deck. That, your weapons are a great way to go about that. The Kodachis pitch a yellow or a blue. Yellows actually, as you get later into the game, if you have some yellow zeros, those actually do a lot of work. They let you trigger both the Kodachis and they get a relevant card back into the deck. Even pitching, you have something that costs 2 that's a yellow, you have a blue, or you have 2 reds. Sometimes if you think it's going to, this turn's going to be a wash, just pitch the 2 reds. That's getting 2 cards back into your deck for later on. And it's kind of hard to talk about maintaining deck advantage because it's so intrinsically tied to the idea of stacking your pitch and building to that late game, in my opinion. But
another thing that's worth noting, and we aren't really going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but there's one advantage that we're not really mentioning too much, and that's life advantage. There's definitely a big difference between being at 40 life and being at 10 life. You're going to play differently in those 2 headspaces. You're going to be in a different mental space in those 2 life levels, right? I'm at 10 life, I'm stressing. If I'm at 40 life, I'm chilling, right? I'm just smooth criminal. But using things like weapons to gain advantages with your deck while also threatening the life total is a good tool. If I can attack with a card or attack my weapon, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, except for if I attack with the card, maybe I'm going to do 1 more point of damage. But if I attack with the weapon, I'm keeping 2 cards in my deck. I probably should swing the weapon. Right? Classic
100%.
example is Bravo's Hammer. Pitch 2 blues, swing for 6. He could also pitch a blue and come in with a yellow or red attack a lot of the times, and that would come in for 6 or 7. maybe have a hit effect, usually not. Um, it's more efficient deck-wise to swing the hammer, and you're threatening just as much life. You're threatening that same life advantage while keeping your deck nice and strong. And that's why we often referred to Bravo as our fatigue hero for the longest time, because he has that built-in weapon advantage that lets him do things like that.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
also defending. Oh,
I was just going to say your most egregious examples, or the polar examples, are going to be things like your ninja, who can pitch a blue, and Kodachi. So that's 2 free damage that can only be blocked if your opponent commits 2 cards because it's 2 separate attacks. And Ranger, that can never attack you without committing a card from their deck to the combat chain to the discard pile. So Ranger never commits damage to the board without losing a card. Ninja can commit 2 instances of damage to the board without losing a card. And or you could consider this a Mechanologist thing, but Mechanologist does actually have to get items out to do that. But in theory, they could do 6 points of damage over 3 instances without ever committing a card to the board.
yep. But I don't know. It's interesting. And then there's we were talking about the like attack, attacking and everything. Defending, there's also, deck relevant math to do with that.
Right.
Because
So this leads into break points. So, when you're wanting to build deck advantages, you want to be efficient. But you also want to make sure that you're playing cards that have nice break points because they require your opponent to be less efficient with their blocking. So, for instance, this is strictly why leg tap cost 1 and head jab costs 0. This is because head jab can be blocked with 1 card, whereas leg tap, unless it's a defense reaction, requires 2 cards. So, it's just the basic math of like getting 2 cards out of your opponent's deck is better than getting 1 card out of your opponent's deck. And so it's just that type of stuff. I know we were talking about Bravo with like, well, then why would you ever want to swing his hammer when you can come up with a 7 strength attack? Well, again, I'm not losing that attack out of my deck if I'm just swinging the hammer, right? And so this is where, they're just opposed of like break points versus efficiency, right? So you really need to consider these types of things when you're playing your game. And kind of relating back to our last video of who's on the beatdown, you need to be adjusting your advantages to be leveraging which position of the game you need to be playing, right? So whatever aspect is your win con, you need to address that and then push your advantages to that direction. If your advantage is your deck, then maybe you're okay blocking with extra cards to make sure you eventually fatigue them out. If your advantage is you're pressuring them and they're close to death, you're expending every card out of your hand just to attack and using your life as a resource. So, it all kind of ties together, these different things we're talking about. And that's what makes it kind of hard to talk about, is it's a big world out there.
I mean, this even ties into like sequencing of how you go about attacks. If you can create multiple instances of attack, like don't lead with the big attack. Potentially, maybe it's good to lead with the small and medium thing.
The small awkward attack.
Yeah, they're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll take. And now, hey, I've come in with my big attack, and now you're down to 1 or 2 cards in hand, so I'm getting relevant damage through. While it is a lot of fun to play the big scary attack first, and you feel good that they're having to play multiple cards to defend, maybe it's better to like slowly bait out. And that's why Kodachis are so great.
Yeah, that's why so often I do consider that free damage, because if I'm sitting across the table from my opponent and I'm not at that ever-present 10 life threshold or something of that nature, if I'm sitting at 40, I'm taking both of those Kodachis. The only reason I'm not taking them is if I really fear a Razor Reflex, and even then, that early in the game, I just don't care about that. I'm going to take that damage because I'm not going to lose the card advantage for 1 damage.
Yeah. A counter argument is like there have been times where I've blocked the 1 damage because I fear more of their turn continuing with the next attack that I'm not confident I'm going to be able to block out. So if I'm like, okay, I can come back aggressively with a 3-card hand, I'll take that 4-card, I'm blocking a Kodachi, I'm taking the losses.
Yeah, I should say for our new players, if you're sitting across the table from a Mask of Momentum, the common play line and probably the correct play line is to block the second Kodachi and attempt to make sure it breaks it breaks the hit effects there.
To be very clear, though, it doesn't mean you always block the second Kodachi. It's just whenever you are needing to break up that play line, but also can only afford one card towards it.
Yeah.
And that's why if you're playing Ninja and you think your opponent has that like mindset, that's when you do Kodachi attack. And then they're like, what's going on?
You mean Kodachi attack, because the second Kodachi doesn't trigger Mask of Momentum, Shay?
That.
No, you trigger off the fourth attack in that case.
But why?
But that's a lot of risk on the third attack.
Because they block the third. They block the third
No,
Kodachi.
You'd be surprised how often when you come in with the third attack as the Kodachi, they're like, oh, they don't have anything relevant to do.
You do not play me and Shay enough. Or you do not play me and Drayton enough.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, no, you guys know it. But like,
okay, yes, correct. Newer players
you
will
guys
fall
assume
into
I
that.
know what I'm doing, but like other people are like, oh, this guy's an idiot. And I'm like, no.
All right, please do not just assume that your opponents will think you're an idiot. It's not a good strategy for you, Shay.
Moving on to a more intelligent strategy, pitch stacking.
Wow, harsh.
No, pitch stacking's awesome. Like, it's one of my favorite parts of this game.
Okay.
I love it. Okay, so this is the area that we do get a little bit to deck building. I know we said we weren't going to really discuss deck building, and we aren't, but deck building is crucial to understanding your pitch stacking. So when I say pitch stacking, this is just being very cognizant of what cards you are paying resource costs for, and this is going to loop back into the discussion of having card advantage in the late game. So I am a warrior player. I often have been a warrior player. I've played Dorinthia for a long time. The most common thing that I see Dorinthia players do that are new is I see them spending all of their resources early. So I will pitch a blue card, I'll come at you, and I will attack you with my Dawn Blade, and I'll get my go again, and I'll attack again. But I will only be pitching blue cards to do that. Well, what that means is if you can take me to the long game, I've done absolutely no pitch stacking, I have no gas left in my deck, and all I can do is put out 3 damage with my Dawn Blade. I can do absolutely nothing else. So I probably should be pitching some reds, some sharpened steels, some damage cards, some things that I can actually bring the game home with. So that's kind of where I define it early on. There is more to it, but that's where I think we should start off with.
Yeah. At its highest level, you're creating a pattern where you know that you cycled through your deck and all that. But especially if you're kind of looking for like newer player, a real good rule of thumb is don't play all your red cards on the first run through the deck, or else you'll just be playing blue cards. And turns out nobody respects blue cards in the late game.
It is worth noting it kind of also depends on the style of deck you're playing. When I was playing Katsu, when I'm playing Viserai, those heroes shuffle their deck a lot. And so pitch stacking becomes a lot less relevant for those heroes. On the other hand, Oldhim, he's really efficient at pitch stacking because he uses Crown of Seeds to accelerate the rate at which he's moving through his deck. He's also very defensive. He likes to use his own defense reaction that's literally printed on him to be more stall out games and things like that. He can set up cards like, for instance, Oakenold. Seems like a really hard card to pull off an attack with a lot of the time. It feels like it needs a lot of luck. Well, if you pitch stack it, where you put the Oakenold, you put you put an Earth and an Ice card next to it, and then you put a blue in there, you have the formula that's going to naturally come back up to the deck. Similar thing with Kanos. Kanos will often use Opt to set up specific sequencing, and then once they hit up to that sequencing, they just go off and kill somebody. So it is a difficult strategy because it does require a lot of thinking and remembering things on your part.
Patience.
Patience. But it will definitely give you strong value later in the game. Even just again, Opt, going back to that ability, there's lots of things that allow you to opt in the game. And so let's say you see a red card and you're like, I don't need that right now. Sink it to the bottom. Let it go into that pitch stack and come back up later in the game when you actually need it, when it's more relevant.
So I Sink Below is so good. It's like, this turn is going to be a ripe potato. So we're just going to put that relevant combat card down there at the bottom and see if I can draw into like another D-React.
Well, similar thing, like let's say you have too many blues, and you're like, okay, well, let me get one of these blues out of my hand. Because in other decks, sometimes it's not the red cards that are the ones that you run out of. Sometimes it's the blue cards, and that can be an equally bad problem. If you block with too many blue cards and you haven't kept those into your pitch, you can run out of them as well. It's a rarer problem. I'm not saying it happens a lot, but it is something to be cognizant of, like how much do things in your deck actually cost.
And if you don't want to have to worry about the pitch value axis of this whole equation, play Prism. And just everything's yellow. Yellow for days.
Even that's a little more complicated, but...
I know.
True, but pitch stacking is still relevant. You're right.
Yeah.
I do think it just a little bit it's going to come down to you are up to the variance of the first draw of your deck, but you are never up to the variance of the second draw of your deck. By the time you've made it through your deck the entire first time and you're redrawing cards, you should be able to have a game plan together. And often in high-level play, especially high-level play that's not too aggro decks that are unlikely to see the second cycle of their deck, it is who has stacked their deck better, who has appropriately planned better at that stage that ends up winning. Because they can play in those finishing turns, and then that enables them to control the game by sitting back and defending because they know they've built their inevitability into the game.
Your second run through the deck is either a victory lap or a walk of shame.
But it's also very important to pay attention to what your opponent is pitching. It's something that I'm poor about. That's probably the area of the game I miss the most. I do tend to not really key into exactly what my opponent is pitching on any given turn. I don't necessarily look and go, okay, well, Drayton pitched his Crippling Crush on turn 2 with 3 other cards, and here's about how long it's going to take it to come back through the deck. I'm a bit poor on that, but...
I try... Now, let's talk about that for a minute, because some people, they have really great memory. They are really good at they can see 3 cards you pitched 2 turns ago come up 7 turns later, and they know the whole stack of your deck because they've been paying that much attention, and they just have the headspace for that. I am not one of those people. I do not want to work at becoming one of those people because that does not seem like an efficient use of my time. But I can remember, hey, I saw that card go away 2 turns ago. I now see them playing their third one and it's going to the discard. I probably don't need to worry about that card for at least 3 turns, and I can play around that. I can do that math. And I think most of us can.
I think that's your goal, your happy medium.
And so, what Adam's mentioning is he mentioned a card, Crippling Crush, those big bomb cards that are in people's decks that you need to be aware of whenever they are playing them, when they've used them, things of that nature, right? Defense reaction counting versus a control deck, things of that nature are more of what you want to be looking at rather than just, oh, I saw a card, I'm memorizing it. Don't do that to your soul and mind. Be clever, be smart about it, pick and choose which cards you really need to remember and think about. Same thing with your own deck. Like I mentioned with the Oakenold, that's a combo to remember. If you can remember the turn before it so you know it's coming, great. But if not, just make sure you've actually pitched and you're aware of it, right? Know that, hey, around this time it's going to be coming back. I should probably have a feel for that.
Or if you're aggressive as all get out and you're burning through your hands, be it through defense or through drawing every turn, you can kind of math out when you should be cycling back through your deck. But
yeah, it just depends on if your mind is geared for that mathematical equation, or even if you want to place a trigger card. So I know a lot of Kano players that place a trigger card. So they'll be trying to pitch stack for their combo. They will be aware of what that combo is, but they will intentionally get a card that is completely irrelevant to them beforehand, so that it tells them, hey, my combo is coming up.
Or you play Gambler's Fallacy Kano, and you're just flipping the top cards of your deck, oh, hopefully they're there. Oh,
you can do that. It does win sometimes, unfortunately. For me, because it sometimes wins against me.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we have, and I've all of us have looked into the soul of a Kano player, and known for damn sure that they had no idea what was about to happen either.
Oh, my favorite are the Reinar players that pull that line, because
I know,
because you
like,
know for sure at that point that
you can get into so many situations with Reinhardt that it's like, okay, I'm going to commit to this, not knowing if I can pay for it, not knowing what cards I'm about to draw, not knowing what's about to happen, but it's win or lose at that point.
I'm rolling scab skins, and if I don't roll a 6, I lose the game.
Yep.
That's when you live in the moment, you practice your mindfulness, and there is no past or future.
It's
the
hard,
dice
though.
can't hurt you then.
The dice can hurt me. That's why I don't play a lot of Reinhardt. That's why I'm disappointed in the new set for Reinhardt. The dice can hurt me.
See, I'm excited for the new set for Reinhardt and KO. Like, I'm tempted to buy those scab skins just because, like, oh, what's going to happen this turn?
Now, see, you embrace chaos, and I do not.
We strive away from it. We like to live in happy chess land.
Oh, no,
I
no,
do.
no.
There's enough variance in my drawing of cards as is.
It's gotta tame that chaos, man.
To
That's
go
what
back
fun
to
is.
Ashes, where I can choose my opening hand.
It's not a great game, though.
No,
Anyway,
it
so
wasn't.
before we divert
I
too
liked
much, it wasn't that bad, but it was better as a pre-con. Before we divert too much, does anybody have anything else you think to talk about on building advantage? Do we want to touch on health or anything like that anymore? The problem is some of this can be broken down into really mathy, complex topics, and I don't want to hit that here.
I think we can touch on health just a little bit more than what we did. So, like, it's worth noting, especially for newer players, and this is something like we get in the bad habit with aggregates. I know I did for a little bit after playing Katsu a lot, where I just got to kind of like control the pace of the game myself, and then let's say, oh, hey, you're pressuring me too. I'm not in control anymore. What do I do with my life? It's easy to just think that the damage is damage, but the thing is, you only need one life to win, right? And so you really got to be objective about what a card is doing for you on the crackback, on the next turn, or on, in special cases with certain cards, 2 turns from now if you're going to put it in your arsenal for that long. Otherwise, it's just, you got to be willing to block with cards. Because there is a huge difference between sitting at 20 life and sitting at 10 life. Because it's a lot harder for me to close a game when you're at 20 life than when you're at 10 life. At 10 life, I can make you block with a card from hand, because it's either you block with that card from hand or you're losing the game. 20 life, it's a lot harder for me to make you block with that card from hand. Again, this isn't like saying that you should block with a card from hand. It's that I can force a card out of your hand. I can physically make it that if you don't block me, I win the game. And that's where life advantage really comes into play, is when you get in those situations where, man, I could do so much if only I could keep these cards in my hand. That's when suddenly it's a problem. Similarly, if you're at 1 life, I'm sure a lot of people experience this over the recent Farewell to Broken Wraith weekend. If you're at 1 life playing against a warrior, guess what can happen to you? Steelblade Shunt. I know I lost a game to Steelblade Shunt this past weekend. It happens. So, it's those little things that you want to be aware of with your life totals and controlling your life total as it's coming down. Sometimes it is outside of your control. That's the nature of the game. But there are decisions you can make to mitigate that, and it's worth noting.
Yeah. Or you just let them hit you. And they just get in their head. Like, why do you just take 15 damage? Is he going to crack back with something? Like, then you're in their head.
But then you
I need
don't,
to learn.
and then you lose.
Sometimes you win, and it really reinforces bad habits. And, like, I really just need people to make me respect.
Shay, this is an educational thing. No,
Yeah,
Oh,
Do
Shay,
as
you are
I-
our chaos gremlin, and we love you.
Yeah,
I do.
it's
I love
important.
him.
Yeah.
The
it's
funny
important.
thing is, sometimes you do that kind of thing to me. You do take 15 damage, and I'm like, what's your plan? And you're like, I don't have one. And then somehow you do draw and make one.
Yeah. I mean, it'd probably work. I mean, I took the 15 damage. Might as well do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, in general, getting back on it though, I do completely agree with the life advantages. I think you're right that there is an inevitability built in at a certain point where even if I do draw my biggest and best turn, if I haven't been appropriately blocking throughout the game, it's irrelevant if I deal 20 damage if I'm 25 damage behind. They don't care. And if I've allowed myself to get so low by doing these small piddly attacks, if I'm coming in for 6 or 7, thinking that that's going to work, or even 3 or 4, not saving cards, I may be at a point that even if I do draw my best turn ever, there's no chance for me to play to it, because even if all you can do is come at me for 3 or 4, I have to block. I have to.
Yeah. I mean, you just got to figure out when your threshold is where, like, you can't be so frivolous.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing, though, is, like, the number of games I lost during Road to Nationals playing Katsu into Chain, where it came down to, if I could have just kept this one card in hand, I would have won the game, were a lot. They were so numerous. And it's definitely one of those things where, like, then you go back and you're like, was there another card I could have spent during those last 5 turns that would have been better spent just blocking? And it's hard. It's hard to reassess that. So assessing, like, you just need to get. It's one thing that we all have to train ourselves to be better on, thinking about that in the moment of what is this card meant to do, right? Is it pitching, pitch stacking, becoming a relevant late game effect? Is it blocking and giving me a life advantage? Is it being played to give me a hand advantage, right? Like, which one of the 4 corners of the card do I really need to be looking at, right? Every card has all 4 of those corners filled in with something that it does, right? Exception of non-attacks, kind of, they don't attack, but
sure,
you get what I'm saying,
exception
right?
That proves the rule.
They all do things. They all do multiple things, and they're all meant to do multiple things. There's been many times where I've taken the best card in my deck and I've blocked with it, and that has won me games. Heck, I know in this, and I looked the man dead in the eyes when I did this, but I won a game versus a Prism because turn 1 I blocked with my Tunic. Turn 1 I sacrificed my Tunic to his Herald of Erudition because it's the only way I was going to be able to block it. And he looked at me dead in my eyes like I was crazy. I won that game. Did I feel like a crazy man at the time? Absolutely. Am I recommending it to new players? Absolutely not. But sometimes that's all that card's meant to do. And that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Completely agree. All right, guys. I think that caps us off for the evening. We have talked for a bit, so I'm going to say thank everyone very much for listening or watching now that we are going to be on YouTube as well. You're going to be able to see our faces, our silly reactions to each other, the stupid things that we might or might not do throughout that, and if Shay passes out due to inhaling 3D printer fumes.
It's okay, it's sealed. Though the wind is actually coming back through my ventilation system, which is very concerning.
Or he freezes. So, thank you very much. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate the welcoming Flesh and Blood community, and it's been an exciting game to be a part of. It's looking great going into the next set. So, to keep up with us outside of the podcast feed, find us and follow us on Facebook at Kodachi for 3, and we're going to be doing some new giveaways soon, coming out with the new set. As always, this podcast and those giveaways are sponsored by Edmund Unplugged in Oklahoma, and it's the home store of all our hosts. Thanks again for enjoying, and enjoy playing in the Flesh and Blood.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the Flesh and Blood community. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please share us, leave us a like or a review. If you want to engage with us directly, please find us on Facebook at Kodachi43. And remember, we are available for download on all major podcast providers. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, enjoy playing Flesh and Blood.